Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is my Give Me God of War walkthrough, and we now have the magic chisel and thus can get through this magic door. And this one does not lead to a Valkyrie, I do not think. But this is a really interesting choice for a minigame, I think. It's up there with the Mass Effect 2 mining. I do not know who this is for, but it ain't for me, we'll say that much. I love that crumble at the end, though. That's a lovely, like, dematerialization of the doorway. That's pretty cool. This is a beautiful game, but that minigame is stupid. And all it does is make me laugh by how bad it feels. And it's one of those interesting things, isn't it? There's somebody who thinks up ideas of enabling players to engage with the game, to do something fundamentally tedious, to try and make it less tedious. And they've gone and made something more tedious. It's like so silly. And I loved it because I was watching the spoiler casts with Cory Barlog on all the different like internet people. And the amount of people mentioning that they enjoyed opening those doors boggled my fucking mind. Because the first time I did it, I thought it was the most flappy, flaccid penis of a mechanic ever. It was wonderful. But, you know, it happens, guys. But kick the chain down, keep on moving forward, and I hope you like that mechanic more than I do. Which will hopefully incite the obligatory comment of, is there anything you do like? Yes, pizza. Nah, shut your mouth. But anyhow, back with Sindri, back into the dining hall. There's another one of these convenient doorways, and it's another example of how this game really does sync up into the Metroidvanian aspects of it, because you've been seeing these doors the entire game, and you knew at some point you would make your way through them, but you weren't quite sure as to how, and I think it's kind of interesting that they synced up as well as they did. It really shows a good amount of foresight in their world building and their world development. And it's one of those things that I don't think the game gets praised enough for its world. I think its world is one of its best aspects. I think people get kind of carried away with the fact that it's God of War and it doesn't play like the old games, that they kind of lose sight of the new things that it does. Because there are not many action games that have achieved this kind of scale outside of, you know, third-person shooters. Because I definitely would recommend anybody who is into, you know, Uncharted or into something like Tomb Raider to play a game like this, because it's kind of a very similar take on that kind of game. It's very cinematic, it's got the emphasis on the story and the characters, and then every so often you fight stuff, right? And a lot of people who avoided action games, especially character action games, back in the old days, they avoided them because they always had such a difficult skill ceiling. The skill floor was very high, so picking them up and doing well was the difference between mashing buttons and being successful and actually having to engage your brain and understand how the game plays and do well. And not everybody can do that, because it's not the easiest thing to do. There are people who play games for enjoyment, they don't have the time to invest, and they just want to get through it and enjoy it and have a good time. Whereas you put in some of these old action games, and the first level, the first enemy, the first boss is kicking you in the dick. Like, it's a different type of experience. It's an experience that not many people have even faced, which is why they speak so, you know, they give all those crazy platitudes and allocution about Souls difficulty, when really Dark Souls is just a game that's archaic as fuck and punishes almost every mistake with death. You know, it's essentially a new type of game that's championing old game ideals, and because a lot of people haven't played those old games and those old ideals are new to them, they think it's this, you know, this big grand revolutionary thing, and it's not. It's just different. And I used to say back in the old days that if the mechanics that people praise in Souls games were in other games, they would be 100% critical of those mechanics. It wouldn't be the same thing. And you see that quite a lot. You know, when we see these features that make Souls games so satisfying and rewarding, and you've heard this conversation of what these people say. If those were in Call of Duty, no fucker would beat the campaign. You know? It's just how it works. These people, like, can you imagine if Madden punished you like Dark Souls does? No one would ever finish a season. These channels that are nothing but Madden and football games and basketball games, they'd either have the most hardcore skilled players in the world, or they'd all dry up and die. Because it just doesn't suit certain games. And it's so interesting when people put forward that, you know, that Dark Souls side of the argument, Because this has definitely been inspired by it, there's no two words about it, and the world especially. I think the idea of being in this grand area that you know has subtleties and nuance and details to it that are just beyond your grasp, but you're going to get there at some point, is a really, really interesting mechanic that a lot of devs like to use. And Souls has kind of romanticized it to the point of intentionally making things more obscure than they appear, right? Which is a weird thing, but it's true. And you know the area of this game that stands out the most as the ugliest aspect of Souls design? And that influence that you're just like, why the fuck does it work like this? It's not, you know, the mechanical stuff that I've complained about that shouldn't exist, as much as I wish it didn't. It's the fast travel. So, for people who don't know, because I know that there's still a large, you know, majority of folks who are not familiar with Souls, not that you'd be watching my videos, you're probably watching something like the Rad Brad, but you never know. So for those people, in Souls games, especially the first game, Demon Souls, there was no quick way to move between levels outside of using something known as archstones, which were essentially starting points. They were like those checkpoints in Sonic kind of deals, through the different zones once you'd cleared them. And then in Dark Souls, they give you the ability to warp between those checkpoints. And it was this massive thing, but it had two responses when it happened. The first one was, you know, relief of never having to run around the world again. The second was disappointment because they enjoyed how much they understood and learned the world and optimized their movements because they moved through it so frequently. So you had these two divides. And then in the future games, they gave you that ability much, much sooner than you got it in that first game. But in Dark Souls, it's given to you rather late, and at that point you really do appreciate it because you've spent so long going through this area. But what you didn't realise is each time you went through the area, you learned something, you got better, and it made you a better player, and it was important in the development of your abilities with those games. So then you jump to God of War, that has this topical warping mechanic that I just touched just then but didn't end up using. And it's the most archaic, backwards-ass, stupid bullshit teleport you've ever used. It can only bring you back to one location, and there's millions of these fucking doors, and you're just like, what? Why can't I warp to the other doors? What is this stupid game? Why would they introduce this and then cuckold it in such a way that I just feel like there's a huge black dude doing my wife, and I'm going to have to mop up afterwards? Like, that's what it feels like. And then you get to a certain part in the game, which is way farther than anybody expected, and then you can walk between the doors. Finally, after a dwarf randomly goes, oh, and by the way, here's your Lord Vessel. It's fucked up. It's dumb. It's strange. It's like, of all the things to be inspired by, why would you gate this? This is not Dark Souls. You're not moving back through areas and learning enemies and learning patterns and learning optimized routes. You're moving back through a graveyard of places with empty chests. It's really strange to me. Half of the shit doesn't even link up. Like, it's really weird.